Silent Hill F is the newest entry in the Silent Hill series that released on September 25, 2025 after its long hiatus when Silent Hill/PT had been cancelled early on in the PS4 era. Rest in peace, Silent Hills. And although Silent Hill 2 Remake released the previous year to a great success with players, Silent Hill F is a brand new entry in the main series that managed to attract both veterans and newcomers to the series for the first time relatively quick, which also includes its discussions among players, with one side stating that the game is great, while the other stating the opposite. And while both sides have their respective points of view in this discussion, this game's Platinum Trophy can be summed up in just one word:
fantastic!
Now, I'm going to start off by stating that although I've played and owned the majority of the Silent Hill games that have been previously released, this game's definitely pretty different from the previous entries, especially with it now implementing a Souls-like gameplay system. And although this isn't the first entry that's used a similar system, this one actually fits its gameplay loop for the entire Platinum Trophy journey, alongside its confusing story that does require multiple playthroughs to piece it all together. I won't go into too many details about the game's main story, as I do think that this game's way better if you experience it on your own. Though I will say that all of the trophies that can be placed into different categories, that being stories/endings, challenges, collectibles, and difficulty. With this in mind, I booted up the game and began my very first playthrough on both hard action and puzzle difficulty. This would later become something that I would end up regretting for my first playthrough, but I'll get to that later on, as at the beginning of the game, after being introduced to all of the characters, including our main character Hinako, I unexpectedly earned my first trophy for escaping from the fog monster without getting grabbed by the red tentacles. Now, these types of trophies are some that are sprinkled throughout the entire game, but for my first playthrough, I was mostly earning the trophies that you're supposed to naturally get throughout the course of the main story. This is mostly because I just wanted to enjoy my first playthrough without looking at a trophy list, but if I ended up getting a trophy that requires certain criteria, I wouldn't complain about it, as it would make my repeated playthroughs in the future easier to complete. After I earned that trophy, I kept proceeding to the game, both exploring and adjusting to the game's mechanics. And after completing my first forced encounter, I was awarded with another mandatory trophy before having to use one of my weakest personal skills: solving riddles, especially the ones from Silent Hill games. It was safe to assume that these normally took me a while to figure out, since I personally don't like reading and struggle quite a bit when having to think in between the lines. And although some puzzles/riddles have trophies associated with them, this is one that didn't have one, so I was able to take my time in figuring it out, in which after completing it, I was able to proceed to the next section of the game, figure out the riddle, which by the way wasn't too hard, earn the next story related trophy, and move on to the next part. As I was exploring the next part of the town, I ended up finding the mailbox from Sakuko's house that needed to be opened with a key that I unfortunately didn't pick up until way later on. And due to me missing this at this point in the game, I will have to wait an extremely long time before getting another chance at opening it. As right then and there, I ended up both fighting and evading as many enemies as I could before going into the next riddle of the game, and one that I believe a lot of players, including myself, didn't get after a couple of completed playthroughs: the Scarecrows. I'm not ashamed to admit it, but I ended up just guessing the solution for this riddle, which although is something that shouldn't be done in a Silent Hill riddle, I'm glad it was allowed for this one in particular, as it was extremely confusing. But after clearing out that riddle, I was awarded with another story-related trophy for completing this section.
Oh. Well, how the fuck was I supposed to figure that out?
Back in the other world, after exploring a bit and getting myself a brand new weapon, I would come with my first critiques of the game's combat, and those would be that since you're placed in tight spaces, your weapon tends to smack the walls and cancel out your attack, and that enemies would have some of the longest attack windups that would make From Software blush. But later on with time, I would grow accustomed to these initial critiques and use them to my advantage to turn the tables in my favor. But after clearing out a section that would keep draining my sanity, I ended up going against my first mandatory boss battle of the game, Sakuko. Also, this is where me picking action difficulty hard really bit me in the ass, as I still wasn't accustomed to all of the game's combat mechanics. But did I change the difficulty to story after getting killed a couple of times? Hell no! I was committed to seeing this to the end on hard difficulty, and my efforts eventually paid off, which led me to both continue the story and earning its respective trophy for my troubles. Now that Hinako woke up after getting pushed down the stairs by Rinko, it was time for me to keep exploring the town once again and make my way to the next area of the game, the elementary school. But before I made my way over there, I got the key needed to open Sakuko's mailbox. But like mentioned already, I would have to wait until way later on in the game to get another opportunity to open it. So for now, I just hold on to it and make my way to the school to both continue the main story and earn its respective trophy for making it. And once I reached the school, I was introduced to heavy weapons and 2 riddles, with one being optional and the other one that needed to be solved for story progression. I really got stuck in this mandatory riddle, since I didn't know which of these images were actually needed for the solution. It also didn't help that these images don't have color, so one particular image was throwing me off most of the time. But once I got it, I celebrated for a bit, but then immediately got hit with a second and third part, so no celebrating for me. But once I was able to complete both the mandatory and optional riddle, I was awarded with another story-related trophy for completing the elementary school and was off to take a nap. Since I'm back in the other world once again, I was tasked with going to each section that was available to me and sacrifice each of Hineko's friends. By the way, after doing all of the repeated playthroughs that I needed to do, I can definitely say that all of these characters have issues, especially Rinko. But anyways, I ended up getting another challenge trophy, with this one being for taking down a certain amount of enemies under a blue lamp, which I'm glad they introduced them at this point of the game, since they would always revive in the worst spots possible. Remember how I said that the game places you in many tight spaces when fighting? This is one of the areas that loves doing that. But hey, I'm actually glad that I got this trophy by accident on my first playthrough, as in New Game Plus, this whole area can be done differently and I could have potentially missed out on this trophy. After I cleared out that section, I kept proceeding through the area and encountered an enemy that I would absolutely despise going up against in later sections of the game before finishing the whole area and earning myself the next story-related trophy. And after waking up once again, it was time for me to make my way towards Shu's house at the top of the mountain. You know, this whole mountain section kind of reminded me of Fatal Frame Man in the Black Water. I also ended up getting chased by the fog monster once again before finding a giant tree that granted me a trophy. By the way, this divine tree doesn't do anything in your first playthrough, but it does have a massive role in your New Game Plus playthrough, but I'll get to that when the playthrough begins. For now, I earned another trophy for reaching Shu's house before getting sent back to the other world. Now, this area of the game, which is actually the Fox Shrine, really annoyed me in my first playthrough, mostly due to how many enemies would simply just jump at you from the ceiling. But that would change after I got my first permanent upgrade for when I'm in this other world, the Fox Arm. This was actually great, since it now allowed me to Sandal Snap an enemy out of existence once I knocked it out. Oh yeah, I cleaned up the entire place once I got this ability. I was not going to deal with this in the future, but the upgrades weren't over, as I still had to go over to 2 other ritual spots to get my remaining permanent upgrades, one being for Hineko's quote-unquote Devil Trigger, and another for being able to unlock other paths with your focus ability. I personally prefer the Devil Trigger, since it also makes me invincible for a set amount of time. By the way, the cutscenes that play when first getting these upgrades were definitely something. But now that I had these upgrades, it was time for me to face off against the second mandatory boss, Rinko. With this boss being the one that I finally got a better grasp of how the combat actually functioned. I mean, better late than never, right? But once I defeated her, I was awarded with another story-related trophy and was off once again to the real world, in which after waking up, it was time for me to make my way down the mountain and towards Hineko's house. So after a lot of fighting against enemies and exploring how the town had changed since the beginning of the game, I made it to Hineko's house, which was also the next section of the game. One thing I did notice after all of the playthroughs is that once you reach Hineko's house, you're both locked into the ending that they chose, and the riddles/cutscenes that appear from this point onwards correlate with your ending, regardless of the difficulty that you began your playthrough. As I explored and cleared out Hineko's house, I had reached the third mandatory boss of the game, Ornstein and Smo. I mean, Hineko's parents. It's definitely not a Dark Souls reference, but you can also say that it's Godskin Duo from Elden Ring. But references aside, I was able to defeat them and earn myself another story-related trophy for clearing out this section. So it was time to go back into the other world once again and start clearing out the new area, in which I was able to find the last document I needed for my first collectible trophy. I will say that the collectible trophies are both extremely easy to miss, and some aren't available for you to collect until after you reach your third playthrough. So I really had to keep track of these when I did the repeated playthroughs. But even though I wasn't using any guides for this playthrough, I was glad that I was able to get this trophy extremely early on. And after figuring out both the riddle in the given rooms and the main portrait, I was able to clear this section and earn myself another story trophy. Now that I was back in the real world, the game's main story was starting to reach its climax. But first, I had to make my way back to where Hinago had first gotten chased by the fog monster, which, by the way, was extremely chaotic. There were multiple forced encounters that I actually struggled a lot. Yeah, choosing action difficulty hard was definitely not a good idea for my first playthrough. But hey, I did manage to get another trophy for finally opening Sakuko's mailbox. Yeah, when I said that I was going to open this way later on, I wasn't kidding, but I'm glad I was able to open it now amidst all of the chaos that was happening. After getting myself another story trophy for finally seeing who the fog monster really was, I had to work my way back up to Hinako's house, but this time with the fox abilities. And although some enemies were still annoying, it was actually much easier this time, since I did have those permanent upgrades. It was still going to be a hassle to defeat the enemies that I didn't like facing, as this is one section that I would always have to complete on my repeated playthroughs, so I'd have to get used to it. But for now, after I made my way back to Hinako's house, I earned my last mandatory story-related trophy and was off to the final area of the game. For this final area, it was mostly just a series of forced encounters before heading into the final boss. One thing to note about the final boss is that it does change depending on which ending you're aiming for, and each one has its respective challenge trophy, in which I can admit that once I got to this boss, I just ended up defeating it like I would if I was just doing a regular playthrough, so no trophy for me on this one, but I did get a couple of other trophies, one for getting the first ending, another for beating the entire game on puzzle difficulty hard, and 2 trophies for beating the game in both action difficulty story and hard. Though the action difficulty does stack, it did mean that this game does require a minimum of 3 full playthroughs to earn the platinum due to the puzzle difficulty, in which I actually made a backup save at first, since I now knew that I would have to redo the final boss of this ending to get this trophy. But I opted to do that later on once I got more personal experience with the game. So, on to New Game Plus.
Round 2.
Once a new day came, I pretty much started my first New Game Plus playthrough. And while the game now allowed me to pick the hardest action and puzzle difficulty, Lost in the Fog, I opted to not choose these for the time being. I already went through it on hard difficulty and wanted to see if it was much more enjoyable in its suggested difficulty, as this playthrough was mostly going to be to earn the majority of the collectible and challenge trophies I had missed in my first playthrough, alongside its new ending and story difficulty trophy. The story stays the same for the most part, with the exception of some new areas, collectibles, and cutscenes that change due to you as the player already knowing most of the main story due to having beaten it at least once. But this is one aspect of Silent Hill F that the majority of players missed out on and came to their final verdict after only getting the first ending. And you'll see the huge gap in completion percentage once I get to all of the endings that I need to earn for this platinum trophy, but I'll mention that once again when I get to those endings. So for now, time to speedrun through all of the challenge and collectible trophies that I got on this New Game Plus cycle. I first started off this new playthrough by chucking away the red capsules that Shu gives you at the beginning of the game. I won't be using any of these for any more playthroughs, as all of the endings that I will need to earn for the respective trophies require you to not use the red capsules at all. Fast forward all the way to the shrine path, there was a challenge trophy for completing the shrine riddle without taking any damage from the enemy that's always chasing you. The good thing is that this dude is completely blind, so I would be okay if I just walked around the place, but I did do some quick runs when I knew that he wasn't around me at all. In the case that I did have to fight him, I would play it safe and knock him out for a while and resume my journey, concluding this area's challenge trophy. Next up on the list was completing the Scarecrow puzzle without making a single mistake. Now, for this one, I simply memorized which Scarecrow I needed to pick in each section. Although I did try to solve it legitimately, and I sort of got it, but memorizing which Scarecrow to pick was the better option. In any case, I got this trophy after a couple of attempts and was ready to move on to the next section. In the shrine where I had to face Sakuko once again, I got 2 trophies. One was for increasing my inventory to its maximum capacity. Yep, this game actually has quite a bit of inventory slot upgrades, in which I was glad that I picked all but one upgrade in my first playthrough, as this last one was only available to me after I unlocked an Inari shrine door with the fox brooch. Before I forget, this pin is actually extremely important for future trophies that I'll need to unlock. The second trophy I got from this area was for defeating Sakuko without getting hit once by her Suzu Bell attack. This one actually took me a bit of attempts, since there were times that I would completely lose sight of her and wouldn't hear the bell chime in the proper direction, causing me to get hit by it. But after a couple of attempts, I was able to earn this trophy and was ready to proceed to the next area once again. Next trophy on the checklist was to defeat the Big Jaws McGraw that was in front of the candy store where the first fog monster chase occurred, and since I was playing on action difficulty story, I was able to take a lot more risk when fighting it. It also helped me in seeing more of its moveset, since I evaded the first one that I ever faced in my first playthrough. Not more to say about this trophy other than to just do it! Once that trophy was done, I pretty much kept progressing through the game as I normally would, until I reached the mountain once again, not only to get another trophy, but to see how a new area had opened up for me. These are some of the subtle changes that occur as more playthroughs are done, and a lot of these aren't mentioned if you simply just watch all of the endings in the video, which I'm glad I was able to experience firsthand. But this isn't the trophy I needed. The one I was aiming for was to complete the escape sequence once again, but this time without taking a single hit of damage. I had my struggles the first time I did the sequence, but after learning more of the paths I needed to take and what to avoid, I was able to earn this trophy and keep progressing. Now this next trophy gave me a glimpse of how many players actually went on to at least start a second playthrough for a different ending after beating it once, and it was to reach Shu's workshop without using a single red capsule. This one can be a bit of a grind since the game does place some red capsules for you to pick up throughout your playthrough. It was only a matter of not picking them up and accidentally using them. But once I got this trophy and new cutscene, I was on my way to another section that would only be available to me in New Game Plus. Also, as a little side note, once you get this cutscene, the red capsules don't appear anymore for the rest of your playthrough. Once I got to the Fox Shrine, you know, the place where you are supposed to get the Fox upgrades, I noticed that there was no reason for me to explore the place, as I already had the upgrades and could just make my way towards Rinko's boss battle. But since I was in New Game Plus, I opted to explore a bit to see if there was any new areas that were now available to me. And there was one brand new area that's extremely easy to miss if you just skip the entire section. This Hunter's Dream looking area was actually a riddle that I needed to complete in order to get a couple of trophies later on. But for now, I was able to get one trophy for getting a small vial that was also needed for the ending I was working towards. And after a couple of tries, I was able to figure out the riddle. But this wouldn't come into effect until later on in the playthrough, as shortly after that, I went on to get another trophy for defeating Rinko once again, but without getting hit by any of her puppets. Now, there's one side quest that's available from the very beginning of your New Game Plus playthrough, and that's the Legend of the Sacred Sword quest, in which you have to find 5 statues and provide them with their respective offerings. The game's quite generous since it does give you a hint as to where both the statue and the offering is located so that you can progress it, though I do recommend that you do this before moving on to another section and log your progress. Thankfully for me, I did find all of these on my own, and remember that divine tree I mentioned before? Well, this is where it plays its major role, as going back to it after doing all 5 offerings rewarded me with both the Sacred Sword and another trophy for completing the side quest. Do you remember that riddle I completed in the Fox Shrine? Well, this is where completing it paid off, as it allowed me to purify the Sacred Sword, not only locking in the ending I would get for this playthrough, but also giving me another trophy for purifying the blade. Once I made it back to Hinako's house and cleared it like I did the first time, I did notice that both the riddles and additional cutscenes you get will always change depending on the ending you're getting. It's a pretty subtle difference that you may not notice if you aren't paying attention to the game's main story and just going through the motions. But there is one thing that'll still stay the same regardless of the ending, which is the boss battle you need to complete to progress the game. And this time, I needed to complete a challenge to earn another trophy, which was to only defeat Hinako's father, and I was able to do it fairly quick, not only ending the fight instantaneously, but also granted me another trophy. As I kept progressing and made it back to the last Fox Shrine area, there was a trophy for completing the Inari statue riddle without making a single mistake. I actually struggled a bit in doing this one, as some areas would have fox statues that'll tell you where you're supposed to go, and other rooms wouldn't have these statues, so I would just end up guessing, in which most of the time, I would get it wrong and would need to restart from the very beginning to avoid voiding the trophy. And after a couple of failed attempts, I memorized the path I was supposed to take in all of the doors and was able to earn myself this trophy. Now, once I cleared the final Fox Shrine area, there was only one challenge trophy I needed to earn from the main story, and that was to catch up to the fog monster 3 times in its chase sequence, in which I was glad I was doing this playthrough in story difficulty, since I had to avoid as many encounters as possible to catch up to it as quickly as I could. I would still get the forced encounter, but it was way easier to clear them out in this difficulty, allowing me to earn this trophy and move on to the final sections of the game. Also, before I forget, since I had already opened up Sakuko's mailbox in my first playthrough, I didn't need to open it again, as the mailbox would already be open since the beginning of this playthrough. This is a very important thing to note, and it'll make sense once I go into the other New Game Plus playthroughs. After I completed both the penultimate and final section of the main story once again, I was off to fight against the final boss of this ending, the Tsukumogami, or Shu. Yup, Shu also has his own personal issues, which also had its respective challenge trophy, which was to defeat him without getting hit by a single arrow that he can shoot at you. And I was glad that I was able to both beat him and earn this trophy on my very first attempt. This also granted me another trophy for earning the second ending of the game. Now, when I got this ending, it really showed me the gap between players that only did one playthrough and those that completed a second playthrough. This makes me wonder how many reviews were published by players that only did a single playthrough and simply moved on to the next game. But aside from those personal questions I had, I was also awarded with a trophy for beating the game on puzzle difficulty story, meaning that I only had the Lost in the Fog difficulty options for the next ending I chose to go for. But before I went on to my third playthrough, I actually went back to my first playthrough save file and gave the Shiromoku boss battle another try to earn its respective challenge trophy, which was to defeat her without dying a single time. And with me now having much more experience than before, I was able to get this trophy on my third attempt, allowing me to both move on to the other endings and focus on the other trophies that I'll need to earn on the way.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Another day came and the third playthrough began, in which I can say that nothing eventful happened, other than seeing that I'm able to get the sacred sword as soon as I found the first Jitsu statue that's in the Scarecrow fields. Remember how I said that Sakuko's mailbox was always open when starting a new playthrough? Well, this also applies to the sacred sword side quest, meaning that I never have to complete that side quest ever again in future New Game Plus cycles, which is actually pretty neat. Honestly, for this playthrough, I was actually aiming to get the third ending of the game, but I ended up finding all of the movie posters that are around the real world, alongside a node located in the area where Big Jaws McGraw is. This triggered the UFO ending, which not only ended my third playthrough immediately, but it also rewarded me with another ending trophy. Fun fact, I had actually started this playthrough on hard action and puzzle difficulty, so it really showed me that I had learned a lot about the game.
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know.
Immediately after earning this game's joke ending, I pretty much started my fourth playthrough, and since I saw that I was pretty experienced at this point in time, I began this playthrough in Lost in the Fog action and puzzle difficulty. I'm going to summarize how this difficulty was for me. Yeah, aside from the riddles, I actually didn't struggle too much in this difficulty, as I also got the majority of the collectible trophies that will only be available to me starting the second New Game Plus cycle and future playthroughs, starting off with getting all the available Omamori from the save station. Yeah, I had more than enough fates saved up due to me selling a lot of stuff that I would find in all of my playthroughs. Also, since I got the UFO ending in my third playthrough, once I interact with any movie poster that's used for that ending, I immediately get a sweet lightsaber that I could use for the entire playthrough, while also being able to use the sacred sword from the same Jitsu statue. Now it was time for me to get all of the pending documents that were now available to me in this New Game Plus cycle, not only finishing most of the character entries in Hineko's journal, but rewarding me with all of the collectible trophies. Starting off with all the documents for Rinko's diary. I kind of already knew that shit was this game's yandere. Then all the documents for Sakuko's diary. At least I finally knew why she kept calling Hineko a traitor.
Fine, jeez.
Next on the line, all of the documents for the Diary of Revenge. I'm actually glad I got this trophy in this specific playthrough, since these little boxes are also part of another trophy that I got later on, but I'll get to that later. As I also have to mention that I got another trophy for getting all of the documents for the clinical trial. Yeah, Shu definitely knew what he was doing with those red capsules. Remember that little box I mentioned just a while ago? Well, this was to make progress on one trophy that would be available to me if I had the Fox Rouge on me. I actually tried getting this one on my second playthrough, but they're pretty easy to miss, since some of these boxes and doors are pretty well hidden. But with me finding all the boxes and doors with Inari-sama's seal, I was able to get both its respective trophy and the final Emma I was missing to get my final upgrade, rewarding me with its trophy as well. Now, if I ended up dying in future playthroughs, it would ultimately be a skill issue, in which I'll say that I didn't have many issues in the final sections of the game. Since I was technically in my fourth playthrough, I was pretty accustomed to both the controls and the counter timings for the majority of the enemies. Even sections that I thought were going to be miserable, I was able to clear them out relatively quick. I also got to the end of the game where you save your game before going into the final boss with a metric ton of items to spare. It was safe to assume that I was well prepared for this ending's boss battle. Now, the final boss for this ending was the Shichibi. aka the Seven-Tailed Fox. And with me being in Lost in the Fog difficulty, I not only had to defeat him to get its ending, but I also had to do its respective challenge trophy, which was to defeat all of his summoned enemies before finishing him off. And I was glad that I packed a couple of knives for this boss battle, since it allowed me to clear them out extremely quick. Now for Shichibi, I struggled quite a bit in learning his moveset, especially if it was either a tail attack or a lunge. But regardless of me struggling against him, I was able to defeat him on my first attempt, rewarding me with this boss's challenge trophy, ending trophy, and the 2 trophies for beating the game in Lost in the Fog action and puzzle difficulty.
Sometimes I let matches burn down to my fingertips just to feel something, anything.
Since I completed my 4th playthrough in the hardest difficulty already, I could pretty much start my final playthrough in any difficulty, in which I chose to do my final playthrough in Lost in the Fog difficulty. Yep, I personally just wanted to have a challenge and enjoy my final playthrough, as opposed to just blazing through it in the easiest difficulty. And there were only 4 trophies I needed to earn to get the platinum, with 2 of them being story/ending related, the final boss challenge trophy, and 1 collectible trophy that I would always miss. Fast forward all the way to the path leading to Hinako's house. In order for me to get the final ending, I had to purify the sacred sword, which, by the way, like Sakuko's mailbox, I didn't have to solve the riddle ever again. It was just permanently completed. Obtain the small vial that's in that area, and finally offer the fox brooch to the Jisu statue that's on the way to the house. This not only gave me the trophy for offering the brooch, but it also locked me into the ending once I went into Hinako's house. Once I was in Hinako's house, there was one Omamori that was exclusive to this area, and one that's extremely easy to miss if you cleared everything and just ran past everything in the final stretch, in which I was glad that I decided to give the place one final check before leaving, leading me to a secret area that only unlocked after solving the picture riddle. This awarded me with the final collectible trophy, and I was set for the last 2 trophies I needed for the platinum. Also, since I was going for the final ending, I have to mention that the cutscenes that played during this entire section and the final riddles that come afterwards are both completely different from all of the others and bring a lot of closure to Hinako's story. After clearing out everything that was left in the main story for the last time, I reached the final save before this ending's final boss, and same as with my previous playthroughs, I was more than prepared to take on my final challenge to earn this game's platinum trophy. This ending's final bosses? Yeah, you heard me. There's 2 final bosses in this ending, which are Kyubi, aka the Nine-Tailed Fox, and the Tsukumogami. In other words, I was going to have to fight both final bosses from the 2nd and 3rd ending of the game. And since I knew that there was a challenge trophy associated with this fight, I decided to give it a check before starting. And the challenge was to defeat both of them within 10 minutes of the fight starting. And since I was in the hardest difficulty, I had to make a lot of risky decisions to speed up the process, as each boss had 3 phases, with the game giving me a checkpoint after taking down 1 phase of each boss. I didn't know if the checkpoint would keep the time I had, so if I ended up dying in a phase of either boss, which mostly happened in Kyubi's phases, I would just restart the fight from the very beginning. It took me a couple of attempts to finally defeat both of them in the time that I needed, and a very close one for me as well. But once I was able to defeat them both, I was immediately rewarded with the final challenge trophy, the final ending trophy, and lastly, the platinum trophy. Silent Hill F's Platinum Trophy really made me appreciate the game a lot more, as it allowed me to see the entire picture of it as opposed if I just beat the game once and moved on. But before I go into more details about that, here's my personal ranking of the top 3 hardest trophies to earn for this game. 3rd place goes to Puppet Master. This trophy can be difficult to get if you're in the wrong position when he decides to shoot arrows at you. Although most arrows can be dodged by simply running sideways, there were times in my final playthrough that I ended up getting hit by arrows because I wasn't already moving before he started blasting me with either a single arrow or the rain of arrows attacks he does during his final phase. 2nd place goes to Godslayer. The factors making this trophy hard to earn are that you have to defeat 2 final bosses that switch after one of their phases end and have it to do it under a time limit. This is one trophy that can also be difficult if you as the player doesn't know how to fight either boss properly to avoid a time loss. In my case, I didn't have any trouble dealing with the Tsukumogami, but Kyubi was a completely different story. And 1st place has to go to Clear Skies. I'm not including the puzzle difficulty alongside this one, as those can be trivialized if you decide to make a quick search for the solutions. But for the action difficulty, if you as a player isn't properly prepared and still struggle with the game's enemies, whether it be their damage output or animations, this difficulty will keep punishing you for even the slightest mistakes. The only advice I can give for this trophy is to keep on learning from your past mistakes and learn those counter timings, as they're essential for earning this trophy. As I mentioned just a while ago, Silent Hill F's Platinum Trophy made me appreciate the game a lot more, as when doing more playthroughs, I was able to find more and more secrets/lore about the game, while also enjoying the game's core gameplay a lot more than when I did my first playthrough. But I will say that this game isn't made for all types of players, as some players will decide to pass on it either by its core gameplay being a Souls-like, or by its confusing story that does require multiple playthroughs to get the full pictures. Plus, with this game already selling a good amount, it showed to Konami that Silent Hill fans crave for more entries, whether it be by the new entries or remakes on its previous titles, and I'm currently on board with Konami giving Silent Hill fans more to look forward to in the near future. Now tell me, did you platinum Silent Hill F? If so, share with me your personal opinions on the game as a whole. I'd like to know what other players thought about this game. See you around in the next Platinum Trophy I decide to add to my current collection.